clock on the warehouse wall showed 11:47 p.m. when Jerome finally punched out. Another long shift of loading trucks and moving boxes was behind him. His back ached, and his work boots felt heavy on his feet, but he was grateful for the steady paycheck. The job wasn't glamorous, but it helped him pay the bills while he figured out his next move in civilian life. Jerome stepped out into the cool night air and pulled his jacket closer. The parking lot was mostly empty now, with just a few cars belonging to the night's security crew. He decided to walk home instead of waiting for the late bus. The exercise would do him good, and the 20-minute walk through the quiet neighborhood always helped him clear his head after work. He started down the familiar route, past the closed shops and dimly lit street corners. This wasn't the best part of town, but Jerome had never felt unsafe here. He kept to himself, minded his own business, and treated everyone with respect. Most of the locals knew him by now and would wave or nod when they saw him walking to or from work. Tonight felt different somehow. As Jerome turned onto Maple Street, he noticed a police car cruising slowly behind him. He didn't think much of it at first. Cops patrolled this area regularly, especially late at night. But when he turned left at the next corner, the squad car turned left too. When he crossed the street, it followed. Jerome felt his stomach tighten. He'd done nothing wrong, but experience had taught him that sometimes that didn't matter. He kept walking at his normal pace, trying not to look back. Maybe the officer was just heading in the same direction. Maybe it was nothing. But when he turned into the alley that was a shortcut to his apartment building, the police car's headlights suddenly blazed bright behind him. The car accelerated and pulled up to block the other end of the alley. Jerome found himself trapped between brick walls and a police vehicle. 2 more squad cars appeared within seconds, their red and blue lights painting the alley walls in flashing colors. Jerome stopped walking and slowly raised his hands, even though no one had told him to. His military training kicked in automatically. Stay calm. Follow orders. Don't make sudden movements. 3 officers got out of their cars, hands on their weapons. The first one was a heavy-set man with sergeant's stripes who looked like he'd been doing this job for years. The second was younger, maybe fresh out of the academy, and seemed nervous. The third officer was leading 2 large German shepherds on leashes. "Turn around and put your hands against the wall," the sergeant barked. Jerome complied immediately. "Officer, I think there's been some mistake. I'm just walking home from work." "Shut up," the sergeant snapped. "Match the description of someone who robbed a convenience store 3 blocks from here 20 minutes ago." No? Jerome's heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady. "Sir, I was at work until just a few minutes ago. I can show you my time card. I have my work ID in my wallet." The younger officer stepped forward. "Sarge, maybe we should check his ID first." "I said shut up," the sergeant repeated, but this time he was talking to his fellow officer, Rodriguez. "I know what I'm doing. This guy's our robbery suspect." Jerome tried again. "Please, officer. Just let me show you my identification. You can call my supervisor at the warehouse. I've been there all night." But the sergeant wasn't listening. His mind was already made up. In his experience, people who ran from robbery scenes always had excuses. They always claimed to be innocent. This was just another criminal trying to talk his way out of trouble. The situation was getting worse by the second. Jerome could feel the tension building. The dogs were getting agitated, sensing their handler's stress. They started barking and pulling at their leashes. The sound echoed off the alley walls, making everything feel more chaotic. "Officer, please," Jerome said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'm a veteran. I've served 8 years in the Army." "Not running from anything? Just check my ID." The sergeant laughed bitterly. "Yeah, right. And I'm the president, Rodriguez. You know what? I'm tired of listening to this guy's lies. Let's see how tough he is when he's got some real motivation." To tell the truth, the K-9 officer looked uncertain. "Sarge, are you sure? He's not resisting. Maybe we should? Are you questioning my judgment, Rodriguez?" The sergeant's voice was dangerous now. "This is our robbery suspect. He's not cooperating. Release the dogs." Jerome felt ice in his veins. He'd seen what police dogs could do when they were set to attack. He'd also seen what happened to people who tried to run from them. But something else was stirring in his memory. Something from his years in Afghanistan, working alongside the military's four-legged soldiers. "Rodriguez, you heard me? Release the dogs. Now." The canine officer hesitated for just a moment longer, then unclipped the leashes. "Find him," he commanded in a sharp voice. The two German shepherds immediately locked onto Jerome. Their training kicked in, and they launched themselves forward with powerful strides. Their barks turned aggressive, and their teeth showed white in the streetlight. These weren't pets, they were weapons, trained to take down suspects and hold them until human. Officers could take control. Jerome's mind raced. He had seconds before the dogs reached him. He could try to run, but he'd never outrun two German shepherds in an alley with no exit. He could try to fight them off, but that would only make things worse with the officers. They'd probably shoot him if he appeared to be attacking their dogs. But then something from his past life clicked into place. These weren't just attack dogs. They were working dogs, trained professionals just like the ones he'd spent years alongside in the military. They had protocols, responses, behaviors that went deeper than their attack training. As the first dog leaped toward him, Jerome dropped into a defensive crouch. But instead of covering his face or trying to run, he did something that surprised everyone in that alley, including himself. He fell back on 8 years of experience working with military working dogs in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. The first German shepherd was less than 3 feet away when Jerome's training took over completely. About canine behavior, pack dynamics, and handler authority came flooding back. He wasn't just some random person in an alley anymore. He was a dog handler, and these were working dogs who had been trained to respond to authority figures who knew how to communicate with them properly. What happened next would change everything. Jerome's body moved before his mind could catch up. 8 years of working with military dogs in Afghanistan had burned certain reactions into his muscle memory. As the first German shepherd charged toward him, Jerome didn't panic or freeze. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and locked eyes with the approaching animal. "Halt," he commanded in a deep, authoritative voice that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. The word carried weight that surprised everyone in the alley, including Jerome himself. It wasn't just a word, it was a command delivered with the kind of confidence that only comes from years of experience. The kind of voice that had controlled explosive detection dogs in combat zones and patrol dogs on dangerous missions. The first German shepherd stumbled slightly. It was forward. Momentum fighting against something deeper in its training. Military working dogs and police K9s shared similar foundations in their education. They were taught to respond to authority, to recognize leadership, and to follow commands from qualified handlers. But the dog was still moving forward. Still. Following its attack training, Jerome knew he had seconds to establish control, or this situation would end badly for everyone. He dropped his right hand to his side and made a sharp, cutting gesture that any military dog handler would recognize. Instantly. "Sit. Stay," Jerome barked, his voice carrying across the alley with absolute authority. The effect was immediate and stunning. The first German shepherd planted its feet and dropped into a sitting position so quickly that it looked like someone had pulled an invisible string. The second dog, which had been racing to join the attack, also skidded to a stop and sat down automatically. The 3 police officers stood frozen, their mouths open in disbelief. In their combined 20 years of working with K9 units, they had never seen anything like this. Their trained attack dogs had just completely ignored their commands and obeyed a complete stranger. Jerome kept his eyes locked on the dogs, maintaining the authoritative posture that he'd learned was essential when working with military animals. He could see the confusion in their eyes, but also something else. Recognition. These dogs knew they were in the presence of someone who understood them, someone who spoke their language. "Good dogs," Jerome said, his voice now softer, but still commanding. "Good dogs. Easy now." Both German shepherds relaxed slightly, their tails even starting to wag a little. They were still alert and ready, but the aggressive tension had completely drained from their bodies. They looked more like pets waiting for their next command than attack animals who had been sent to take down a suspect. Officer Rodriguez, the canine handler, was the first to find his voice. "What the hell just happened?" Rex and Duke don't respond to anyone but me. They've never... they were in full attack mode, and then they just... Jerome slowly turned his head to look at the officers, but he kept most of his attention on the dogs. In his experience, the moment you took your focus off working dogs completely, they might revert to their previous commands. He needed to maintain control until the situation was fully resolved. "These are good dogs," Jerome said calmly. "They're just following their training." Military working dogs and police canines learn similar basic commands. They recognize authority when they see it. The young officer took a step forward, his hand moving away from his weapon for the first time since this whole thing started. "Are you saying you know how to handle police dogs?" Jerome nodded slowly. "I worked with military dogs for 8 years. Explosive detection, patrol work, drug searches. These two have excellent training. Whoever taught them did a good job." The sergeant was still trying to process what he just witnessed. In his 15 years on the force, he'd seen canine units in action dozens of times. He'd watched suspects try everything to avoid or fight off police dogs. Some people tried to run, others tried to fight. Few had tried to distract the dogs with food or toys. But he had never, not once, seen someone simply take control of attack dogs with voice commands and hand signals. "Rex, come," Rodriguez called to his lead dog, trying to reassert control over the situation. The German Shepherd looked at Rodriguez, then looked back at Jerome, clearly confused about who he should be following. Jerome recognized the conflict immediately. The dog was caught between two authority figures and didn't know which commands to follow. Jerome made a subtle hand gesture, releasing the dogs from his commands. "Go ahead, boys. Back to your handler." Both dogs immediately stood up and trotted over to Rodriguez, who clipped their leashes back on with shaking hands. But even as they rejoined their official handler, both animals kept looking back at Jerome with what could only be described as respect. The alley fell silent, except for the sound of heavy breathing, the distant hum of traffic, the flashing. Police lights continued to paint the walls in red and blue, but the whole atmosphere had changed. What had started as a potential disaster had turned into something none of them had ever experienced before. The young officer was the first to break the silence. "Sir, I think we need to step back and reassess this situation. This man clearly has experience with working dogs. Maybe we should check his identification like he asked." Jerome nodded gratefully. "My wallet is in my back pocket. I can show you. My military ID, my work badge, and my time card from tonight. I've also got the phone number for my supervisor if you want to verify that I was at work during the time of that robbery." The sergeant looked uncomfortable, but he was beginning to realize that they might have made a serious mistake. The way this man had handled their canine unit wasn't something you could fake or learn from watching movies. It took real experience, real training, and real confidence. Slowly, the sergeant said, his voice much less aggressive than before. "Take out your wallet slowly." Jerome complied, moving deliberately and keeping his hands visible. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his military identification card, his work ID badge, and a time card that clearly showed he had been at the warehouse until just 20 minutes ago. The young officer examined the documents with his flashlight. "Sergeant Davis, this guy's military ID shows 8 years of service, and look at his specialty code. Military police, K9 handler. He really is what he says he is." Rodriguez was still staring at his dogs, who were now calm, but continued to watch Jerome with obvious interest. "I don't understand how you did that. I've been working with Rex for 3 years, and Duke for 2. They've never responded to anyone else like that." Jerome managed a small smile for the first time since this whole thing started. Dogs recognize confidence and experience. In Afghanistan, we worked with bomb detection dogs, patrol dogs, and search dogs. You learn to read their body language, understand their training, and communicate in ways they respond to. Your dogs are well trained. They're just doing what they've been taught to do. The atmosphere in the alley was completely different now. What had started as a confrontation between police and a suspected criminal had become something else entirely. 3 officers were beginning to realize they had just tried to arrest a military veteran, who probably had more experience with working dogs than their entire police department combined. But the real shock was still coming. None of them realized yet just how much this moment would change everything. Officer Davis, the young rookie, kept staring at Jerome's military ID under his flashlight. The specialty codes and service records were starting to paint a very different picture than what they had assumed just minutes earlier. He looked up at Jerome with a mixture of curiosity and growing respect. "Sir, this says you served with the 89th Military Police Brigade. That's a pretty serious unit, isn't it?" Jerome nodded, still keeping one eye on the two German shepherds who continued to watch him with interest. "We handled base security, convoy protection, and canine operations in some challenging areas. Afghanistan mainly, but also some time in Iraq." Rodriguez, the canine handler, was having trouble processing what he'd just witnessed. He'd been working with police dogs for over 5 years, and he thought he understood everything about how they operated, but watching his own dogs immediately obey a complete stranger had shaken his confidence. "How long did you work with military dogs?" Rodriguez asked, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier aggression. 8 years total, Jerome replied. "Started as a basic MP, but they saw I had a natural connection with the working dogs. Sent me to specialized training at Lackland Air Force. Base in Texas, that's where all the military dog handlers get their advanced education." Sergeant Wilson's radio crackled to life. The dispatcher was reporting that they had found the actual robbery suspect 6 blocks away, trying to break into another store. The suspect matched the description perfectly. But he was clearly not the man standing in this alley. Wilson's face went pale as he realized the full extent of their mistake. They had not only stopped an innocent man, but they had tried to use attack dogs on a military veteran who was simply walking home from work. The implications were starting to sink in. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Wilson. We're code for here.
Aye.
The suspect we detained does not match. Repeat, we have the wrong individual." Jerome heard the radio transmission and felt a wave of relief wash over him. Finally, the truth was coming out. But he could also see the worry in the officers' faces as they began to understand what had just happened. Officer Davis looked nervous. "Sergeant, what exactly did they teach you at that Air Force base? I mean, what you just did with our dogs? I've never seen anything like that." Jerome thought for a moment about how to explain his training in simple terms. Lackland is where they teach you everything about working with military dogs. It's not just the basic commands, but how to read their behavior, understand their psychology, and work as a real team. We learned about different breeds, different training methods, and how to handle dogs in high-stress situations. He gestured toward Rex and Duke, who were still watching him attentively. These two are German shepherds, probably from strong working lines. They've been trained for apprehension work, which means they know how to take down suspects safely. But they also know how to respond to proper authority. When I gave them commands, they recognized the voice and body language of someone who knows what they're doing. Rodriguez was fascinated despite himself. "What other kinds of dogs did you work with over there?" "All kinds," Jerome said, starting to relax as the conversation became more normal. "Belgian Malinois for explosive detection, mostly. They're smaller and more agile than German shepherds, great for searching vehicles and buildings. Some labs for drug detection work. And a few German shepherds like these guys for patrol and protection work." Jerome paused, remembering some of his four-legged partners from overseas. "I worked with a dog named Titan for 3 years. Belgian Malinois. About 60 pounds of pure energy and intelligence. That dog saved my life and the lives of my squad members more times than I can count. He could detect improvised explosive devices from 50 yards away." The 3 officers were listening intently now. This wasn't just some guy making up stories about military service. Jerome was speaking with the kind of specific knowledge that only came from real experience. "What happened to Titan?" Davis asked. Jerome's expression grew more serious. "He made it through 2 tours with me, then retired to work with another handler. Last I heard, he was living with a family in Colorado, enjoying his retirement." Military. Working dogs earn their rest after what they go through. Wilson, who had been quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. "Look, Jerome, it is Jerome, right?" Jerome nodded. "Clearly made a mistake here tonight. A big mistake. I'm trying to figure out how to handle this situation." Jerome understood the sergeant's position. Police work was difficult, and mistakes happened. But he also knew that what had occurred tonight could have ended very differently. If he hadn't known how to handle those dogs, if he had panicked or tried to run, someone could have been seriously hurt. "Sergeant, I understand you were doing your job. Someone reported a robbery. You had a description, and you thought I matched it. But maybe this could be a learning experience for everyone." Rodriguez looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" Jerome pointed to Rex and Duke. "Your dogs are well trained, but they responded to me because I knew how to communicate with them properly. That tells me there might be room for improvement in your canine program. It's not criticism," he added quickly, seeing Rodriguez's defensive expression. "Just observation from someone who's spent a lot of time in this field." Davis was taking notes now, clearly interested in what Jerome had to say. "What kind of improvements are you talking about?"
"Well, for starters, cross-training. In the military, we didn't just learn to work with our assigned dogs. We learned to work with any military working
dog we might encounter, different handlers, different commands, different situations. It made the whole program more flexible and effective." Jerome looked at the three officers, all of whom were now listening carefully to what he had to say. "Your dogs are good, but they could be even better. And your handlers could benefit from understanding more about canine psychology and behavior. It's not just about giving commands, and it's about building real partnerships." Wilson was quiet for a long moment, thinking about what Jerome had said. Finally, he made a decision that would surprise everyone, including himself. "Jerome, I know this night got off to a bad start, and I know we owe you an apology, but I'm wondering, ... would you be interested in talking to our canine unit about some of this stuff? Maybe sharing some of your experience with our handlers?" Rodriguez looked surprised but intrigued. "Actually, that's not a bad idea. I'd love to learn more about military training methods. Some of the things you did tonight, I've never seen. Anything like it?" Jerome considered the offer. He had been looking for ways to use his military experience in civilian life, and this could be an opportunity to help improve police-community relations while sharing knowledge that could make everyone safer. "I'd be willing to consider that," Jerome said. "But first, I think we need to finish dealing with tonight's situation properly." Wilson nodded, knowing that Jerome was right. They had made a serious mistake, and it needed to be addressed correctly. But as he looked at this military veteran who had handled their mistake with such grace and professionalism, he began to think that maybe something good could come out of this difficult night after all. 3 days after the incident in the alley, Jerome was eating breakfast when his phone started buzzing nonstop. Text messages, missed calls, and social media notifications were flooding in faster than he could read them. He had no idea what was happening until his neighbor knocked on his door. "Jerome, you need to see this," his neighbor said, holding up her phone. "You're all over the internet, man." Jerome took the phone and watched in amazement as a video played on the screen. Someone had been recording from a window overlooking the alley that night. The footage wasn't perfectly clear, but it showed everything. Police cars arriving, the officers releasing their dogs, and then Jerome somehow making those attack dogs sit down and obey him instead. The video had been posted with the caption, "Black man controls police attack dogs with military training. Amazing." In just 3 days, it had been viewed over 2 million times and shared thousands of times across different platforms. Jerome scrolled through the comments, his eyes getting wider with each one he read. People were calling him a hero. 8 veterans were sharing their own stories about military dog handlers. Others were asking questions about police procedures and why the dogs had been released in the first place, but not all the attention was positive. Some people were questioning why the police had used dogs at all, when Jerome was clearly not resisting. Others were pointing out that this was exactly the kind of situation where things could have gone very wrong if Jerome hadn't known how to handle working dogs. His phone rang. It was a reporter from the local news station. "Mr. Jerome, this is Channel 7 News. We'd love to interview you about what happened the other night. The whole city is talking about how you handled those police dogs. Can we set up a time to chat?" Jerome politely declined and hung up, but the phone rang again immediately. This time, it was a different news station than a radio show, and someone claiming to be from a national television program. By the end of the week, Jerome's story had spread far beyond his local community. News outlets were picking it up. Veteran organizations were reaching out. Police departments from other cities were asking questions about his background and training. The local police department was also dealing with the fallout. Internal Affairs had launched a full investigation into why Sergeant Wilson had decided to release the K-9 unit on a suspect who wasn't resisting and hadn't been properly identified. The department's use of force policies were being reviewed. Several officers were getting additional training on de-escalation techniques. Chief Rodriguez, in relation to the K-9 handler, called a press conference to address the situation, where Jerome watched it on the local news from his living room. The incident involving Mr. Jerome and our K-9 unit is being thoroughly investigated, the chief said, looking uncomfortable in front of all the cameras. We are committed to proper procedures and community safety.
Right.
We're also exploring ways to improve our training programs based on some valuable feedback we've received. Jerome knew the chief was referring to the conversation he'd had with Sergeant Wilson and the other officers that night. Word had apparently gotten back to the department leadership about Jerome's military experience and his suggestions for improving their K-9 program. 2 days later, Jerome got a call that surprised him. It was Officer Davis, the young rookie, who had been in the alley that night. Jerome, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the report we filed. I wanted to apologize again for what happened, but I also wanted to ask you something. Jerome was curious. Davis had seemed like a good officer who was just following his sergeant's lead that night. What's on your mind, Officer Davis? Well, the department is serious about improving our K-9 training. Chief Rodriguez wants to bring in outside consultants to review our procedures and maybe train our handlers on new techniques. Your name came up in the discussion. Jerome sat down, not sure where this conversation was heading. Davis continued. I know this might sound weird given how we met, but would you be interested in consulting with our K-9 unit? The chief has been getting pressure from the city council and community groups to make changes. Having a military expert help us improve could be exactly what we need. Jerome thought about it for a moment. Part of him was still angry about what had happened that night. But another part of him saw an opportunity to make a real difference. I'd need to know more about what exactly you're looking for, Jerome said, carefully. Fair enough. Could you come in and meet with Chief Rodriguez and our K-9 supervisor? It's just to talk about possibilities. No commitments, just a conversation. Jerome agreed to the meeting, mostly out of curiosity. He had been looking for ways to use his military training in civilian life, and this was certainly an unexpected opportunity. The meeting at the police station was interesting. Chief Rodriguez was professional, but clearly embarrassed about the incident. The K-9 supervisor, a veteran officer named Lieutenant Brooks, was genuinely interested in Jerome's background and experience. I've been running our K-9 program for 8 years, Brooks said. But I've never worked with anyone who has your level of training with military working dogs. What you did that night? Our handlers are still talking about it. Jerome spent an hour explaining some of the advanced techniques he'd learned in the military, the differences between police and military dog training, and some ideas for improving handler education. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that both sides were interested in moving forward, but the real surprise came when Jerome left the police station. A small group of community activists were waiting outside with signs supporting him. They had heard about the meeting and wanted to show their support. Jerome, you're a hero in this community, said one of the organizers. It's an older woman named Mrs. Patterson who ran a local veteran support group. What you did that night showed people that we don't have to be victims. We can stand up for ourselves. With dignity and knowledge, Jerome was overwhelmed by the support, but also by the responsibility he felt. People were looking to him as a symbol of something larger than just one incident in an alley. Over the next few weeks, Jerome found himself becoming an unexpected public figure. He was invited to speak at veteran events, community meetings, and even a few police training conferences in other cities. The video of that night had sparked conversations about police procedures, military experience in civilian life, and how communities and law enforcement could work better together. Jerome decided to take a leave of absence from his warehouse job to explore these new opportunities. He started working part-time as a consultant with the local police department, helping to redesign their K-9 training program. He also began speaking at schools and community centers about military service and how veterans can contribute to their communities after coming home. The most rewarding part was seeing the changes in the police department. Officers were learning new techniques, policies were being updated, and the relationship between the K-9 unit and the community was improving. Even Sergeant Wilson, who had made the decision to release the dogs that night, was participating in the new training programs and seemed genuinely committed to doing better. But Jerome knew this was just the beginning. The attention his story had received had opened doors he never expected, and people were counting on him to walk through them. 6 months after that night in the alley, Jerome stood in front of a training facility that didn't exist before his story went viral. The sign above the door read Community K-9 Training Center, and it represented everything he had worked toward. Since becoming an unexpected public figure, the building used to be an old warehouse, not unlike the one where Jerome had worked his night shifts. But now it housed something completely different. Inside were training areas for police dogs, classrooms for handler education, and meeting spaces where community members could learn about K-9 operations and build better relationships with local law enforcement. Jerome walked through the front door and smiled at what he saw. Officer Davis, the young rookie from that night, was working with a new German Shepherd named Apollo. The dog was learning advanced detection techniques under the guidance of Lieutenant Brooks, who had become Jerome's closest partner in developing the new training programs. "Looking good, Davis," Jerome called out as he watched the officer and dog work together. "Remember to keep your commands consistent. Apollo responds better when you use the same tone every time." Davis nodded and continued the exercise. Over the past few months, he had become one of Jerome's most dedicated students, eager to learn everything he could about advanced K-9 handling techniques. The transformation in his confidence and ability was remarkable. In another part of the facility, Rodriguez was leading a group of community members through a presentation about police dog operations. Parents, teenagers, and senior citizens were all learning about how K-9 units worked, what their capabilities were, and how citizens could interact safely with working dogs. This community education program had been Jerome's idea. He believed that much of the fear and misunderstanding between police and communities came from lack of knowledge. When people understood how police dogs were trained and what they were designed to do, they felt more comfortable and confident in their interactions with law enforcement. The most important thing to remember, Rodriguez was explaining to the group, is that these are working animals, not pets, but they're also not monsters. They're professionals, just like the officers who work with them. An elderly man in the audience raised his hand. "What should I do if I encounter a police dog during an incident?" Rodriguez looked over at Jerome, who nodded encouragingly. "Great question. Stay calm. Follow the officer's instructions, and don't make sudden movements. These dogs are trained to read body language and respond to threats. If you're calm and cooperative, they'll remain calm too." Jerome felt proud watching Rodriguez lead this session. The same officer who had released his dogs in that alley was now one of the program's most effective community educators. People could see his genuine commitment to building better relationships and doing his job more effectively. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. There had been difficult conversations, moments of frustration, and times when Jerome wondered if he was trying to change too much too quickly. But slowly, steadily, things had improved. Sergeant Wilson walked over to where Jerome was standing. The relationship between the two men had been complicated at first. Wilson had been defensive about his decisions that night, and Jerome had struggled with anger about how he'd been treated, but over time, they had found a way to work together. "Jerome, the mayor's office just called. They want to schedule another visit next week. Apparently, 3 more cities are interested in implementing similar programs." Jerome nodded. The success of their local program had attracted attention from law enforcement agencies across the state. Police departments were sending officers to train at the facility. Community leaders were asking for help, setting up similar programs in their own cities. But the real measure of success wasn't the attention from outside. It was the changes Jerome could see in his own community. Police-community relations had improved significantly. Use of force incidents involving K-9 units had dropped to 0. And perhaps most importantly, young people in the neighborhood were starting to see law enforcement as partners rather than enemies. Mr. Jerome? A voice called from across the room. Jerome turned to see a teenage girl approaching with her mother. He recognized them from previous community sessions. My daughter has a question about the police academy, the mother said. She's been coming to these sessions for months, and now she's thinking about a career in law enforcement. The teenager looked nervous, but determined. I want to work with police dogs someday, like what you used to do in the military. Is that something I could really do? Jerome smiled. This was exactly the kind of impact he had hoped to achieve. Absolutely. There are lots of opportunities for people who want to work with canine units. You'd need to become a police officer first, then apply for specialized training. But if you're serious about it, I can help you understand what that path looks like. The girl's face lit up with excitement. Her mother looked grateful and proud as the day's training sessions wrapped up. Jerome found himself alone in the main classroom, looking at photos on the wall that documented the program's progress. There were pictures of officers and their dogs, community members, learning about canine operations, and graduates of the training program who had gone on to work with police departments in other cities. But the photo that meant the most to him was a simple one taken just last month. It showed Jerome working with Rex and Duke, the same two German shepherds who had been sent to attack him that night in the alley. Now, they were part of the training program, helping to teach other dogs and handlers advanced techniques. Officer. Davis walked over and stood beside Jerome, looking at the same photo. It's amazing how much things have changed, Davis said quietly. That night in the alley, ... I never imagined it would lead to all this. Jerome nodded. Sometimes the worst. Moments in our lives end up leading to the best opportunities. That night was scary and wrong, but it also opened doors I never knew existed. Davis was quiet for a moment, then asked, Do you ever regret how it all happened? I mean, would you change it if you could? Jerome thought about the question seriously. The incident had been traumatic, unfair, and potentially dangerous. It had forced him into a public role he never sought and brought attention he hadn't wanted. But it had also allowed him to use his military experience in ways that were making a real difference in people's lives. I wouldn't change the outcome, Jerome said finally. But I'd definitely change how we got here. Nobody should have to go through what happened that night. As Jerome locked up the facility and headed home, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. Months ago, he had been a warehouse worker trying to figure out his next steps after military service. Tonight, he was running a program that was changing how police and communities work together. His phone buzzed with a text message from Mrs. Patterson. The community organizer who had supported him from the beginning saw the news story about the mayor's award ceremony next week. So proud of everything you've accomplished. The whole community is behind you. Jerome smiled as he read the message. The mayor's award was nice, but the real reward was knowing that his experience had helped prevent other people from going through what he had endured. Every officer who learned better techniques, every community member who understood police work better, and every young person who saw new possibilities for their future was a victory as he walked home through the same neighborhood where it all began. Jerome felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. It's not just satisfaction or pride, but genuine hope for the future. Sometimes it takes a crisis to create an opportunity, and sometimes the people who seem like enemies can become the strongest allies. The night that had started as his worst experience had become the foundation for his life's most meaningful work.